Okay, so who are you and what do you do?
Okay, so my name's Ian Kinnery. I'm a professional business coach. I've been a professional business coach now for 15 years. Before that, for all of my life, I ran businesses and owned businesses.
Okay, so what businesses did you run? If you just talk us through a little bit of your career, where you've been, what you did.
Okay, so
I'm not going all the way back to year one unless you want to, because like me, you're over 45.
Only just
over 45.
So I started as a graduate management trainee in the motor industry.
Okay, right.
And I was very, very fortunate that I fell, because none of this was planned. I fell into the commercial vehicle side of the motor industry, which meant that I was dealing with some really interesting people, some big numbers, and big lumps of metal, which quite frankly were really attractive. How long
ago was that? When did you? Roughly how long ago was it when you started?
Good heavens, it's got to be over 40 years ago.
Okay, right. So 80s to 90s, isn't it? Is that right? Yeah, 80s to
90s. If not before. Okay. And I was really fortunate, Martin, in that I started working in a large group of dealerships, and I started working for a really impressive individual who was 30-year-old and ran a really big dealership in Bristol.
Right.
And I remember he used to live on a gated estate in Bristol. He didn't have his own squash court and swimming pool, but the gated estate had its own squash court and swimming pool.
Okay, nice.
And I remember we would go down the Tuesday night and play squash and have a swim. And I remember being sat in his bachelor pad, having a beer after that. And I thought to myself, this is what I want to do. By the time I'm 30, I want to be running a business like this, living in a place like this.
Right.
And that really set my sights. So knowing a bit about goal setting, it shouldn't come as a surprise that at 29, I was managing director of a really big, in those days, Leyland truck and Sherpa van dealership in Birmingham.
And did you have the squash court and the gated?
No, I didn't. And the real bummer is I didn't have the Triumph Stag either.
No.
Because it stopped making them by then. But I had all the rest of the stuff, and that was my ambition. So fundamentally, I've been an MD of significant businesses since I was 29.
Okay. So what made you take the jump from working for people to working for yourself?
Well, in about 1990, I ran the biggest Mercedes-Benz dealership in Europe, which was in Glasgow.
Right.
And that was car and truck. And at the same time, I had the opportunity to buy my own business.
Yeah.
So I bought a Vauxhall dealership. I bought and built, because it was a greenfield site, a Vauxhall dealership in, I started negotiating in about 1990.
Yeah.
And I took it on in 1992.
Okay.
Built a brand new dealership on a greenfield site.
Was that in Glasgow or was that somewhere else?
No, that was here in the Northeast. Okay. That's what brought me back to the Northeast, which has always been my home, Teesside specifically. So in 1992, I bought and built my own Vauxhall dealership. 5 or 6 years later, the dealership was doing well, but I was doing badly.
Right, okay.
To cut a long story short, it cost me my health.
Right.
That cost me my marriage. That cost me my home. And it very nearly cost me my life. I mean, it very nearly killed me.
So, I mean, if you don't mind, what was going wrong? Because I think everybody has been through, everybody who's in business has been through issues, but that sounds quite serious.
Oh, it was. I mean, and as we come up to Christmas Christmas 95, January 96, I woke up in hospital.
Right.
I mean, if you imagine a computer that we're looking at the minute with the motherboard gone,
yeah,
that was me.
Right.
I had 70 people working for me. I couldn't remember their names. I was an absolute basket case.
I remember when I ran a bit of agency before this, I remember waking up one morning and my business partner, I won't mention his name, rang me up and said, I'm not getting out of bed. So can you come up and, can you come up and sack the staff? So I went up and told them what was going on and made a couple of them redundant, didn't sack the staff and close the business. But he couldn't get out of bed for pretty much 2 weeks. And I think I work on the base. I think everyone in business is kind of this close to something pushing you over the edge.
Yeah, a friend of mine says we're only one life event away from a major psychological event, and I think I was one event beyond major psychological.
So what prompted that then? What made that happen? Because you seem now you're coaching people, you're extremely competent, you've got all the knowledge. I'm just going to get something to stop this reflection.
Yeah.
Yeah, so what made that happen? Because that's quite a massive thing to wake up in hospital from being, you obviously set your goals, you got your ambitions, you achieved what you wanted to achieve, you were running a big dealership, you knew what you were doing. What went wrong?
Well, the thing about mental illness is it isn't always about cause and effect, and you can't really ever track down what's the one thing. But
no,
for me, I think the way I paraphrase it, Martin, is that I knew how to run a business, but I didn't know how to run myself.
Right.
And a guy called Marshall Goldsmith has written a book called "What Got You Here Won't Get You There," and it's interesting how, particularly for entrepreneurs, exactly the same thing that gets them here, that smooths the way, is precisely the same thing that gets in the way to get them there.
Okay.
So the things that got me here were hard work, diligence, enthusiasm, and energy.
Yeah.
But all of those things, as the business got bigger and it was all down to me, they all started to get in the way.
Yes.
So I tried to do everything myself. I literally worked myself into the ground.
Yeah.
Literally worked myself into the ground. And that's why that January that I ended up in hospital.
So you just kind of snapped, for want of a better word, you just kind of snapped.
Absolutely. And part of the story that I haven't told you is that my father died when I was 14. He had his own business.
Yeah.
So in many ways, I took on the family. I took on all the responsibilities at 14 years of age.
Yeah.
So by the time this happened to me when I was just coming up to 40, I had 20 odd years of driving myself extremely hard.
That's good. It's interesting. I think because my son has seen me working extremely hard and has seen me stressed and all those things, and it's pushed him in the opposite direction so that he doesn't allow himself to get stressed by these things. He's got ambition, but it's not, when he's choosing what career he wants, he doesn't choose the one that's going to make him work from 7 a.m. till 9 p.m, because that's what he's seen me do and that's the life he doesn't want. So it's interesting that you pushed yourself. He ran his own business and that had consequences, and you pushed yourself into running your own business. That was your ambition.
Yeah, it was. And we don't really know where we don't ever really know the influences on our lives. But
No.
you know, I and this isn't a complaint, it's just a statement. One of the things that I think is a real problem is what I refer to as the Puritan work ethic.
Yes.
You know, and I grew up with the words ringing in my ears: you never get anything without hard work.
Yes,
and I didn't consciously take that on board, but unconsciously I must have done.
Yes.
And the other phrase that my father would use was clogs to clogs in 3 generations. I mean, he was a miner who couldn't work down the mine because he'd been an invalid as a child.
Mm-hmm.
So he had to do something else. And I grew with this constant need to prove myself and prove my worth. Probably to him, which is a bit crazy when you think that he died when I was 14. And how do you prove something to somebody that's not there? But whatever it was, that drove me to the edge and beyond.
Do you think that work ethic is still there? Do you think?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, not just in you, but do you think that, because I think there's been changes in the way people work. I can remember when I started work, you were expected to be at your desk at, 15, 20, half an hour before the start of work, and you were expected to be at your desk, an hour and a half after. And that there was an expectation of you that you would put in the hours. And I just wonder whether that still applies.
I think society has changed. That's no longer quite as ingrained and prevalent as it was. But very many, if not most of the entrepreneurs that I work with are absolutely driven. Okay. And at some point it can't any longer be about working harder, because there's a limit to how much harder you can work.
But based on your life experience, what do you do with your people then? Because you're coaching people who are running businesses, and you're a prime example. And we can all pick examples, because we've all been through, all of us have been, there've been times when I've been extremely stressed and can't function properly. But you got to that point and dropped. So how do you, surely when you're working with these people, you're coaching them, because your job is to help them develop their business, you must be constantly aware of the potential issue that can arise.
And that's precisely the reason I do it.
Is it?
Oh yeah, because my stated ambition is to help people not go down that route, because I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. Right.
So how do you do that then? What are you trying to do with people that stops them going down that route? What advice do you give people? I know that's such a broad question, but
it is. But the first thing is to understand what it is we're trying to achieve, because so often we don't. We're just working harder and harder and harder. So we end up running like a hamster on a wheel, and we've never really decided where that wheel needs to go.
Right. Yeah.
So we do everything. Once people can decide what they're trying to build, where they want to go, it then becomes much easier. I'm not saying any of this is easier, but it becomes easier to then prioritize what is the stuff that I absolutely have to do, what is the stuff that I don't have to do, what's the stuff that needs to be done but not by me.
But how do you cope with because I mean, one of the problems I have is that I feel I have to do everything, and certainly at least until a year or two ago, if I'm not doing it, it's not done right. So how do you cope with, which isn't true, I know, but that's the attitude. How do you get people out of that mindset? Because the people you're working with have got experience, they've got knowledge, they've got skill, but they will be in a mindset where some are they in a mindset where in order to achieve, they have to control everything?
Well, very often they are. And remember what I just said, what gets them here won't get them there. And that's one of the things that's got to change. That's one of the things that means that some entrepreneurs are very good at starting businesses, but not growing businesses. See, very often entrepreneurs just make things happen.
Yeah.
They don't wait for permission. They just get on and do it.
Yeah, they do things fast and break them.
Yeah, and that works really well in the early days. But as you start to get people around you, that doesn't work well. So that's fundamentally, Martin, that's one of the pivot points.
Yeah.
In what you're referring to as mindset.
Yeah.
And helping people understand that and then implement it is really, really important, because if you've got a business of £200,000 turnover, for argument's sake, maybe you can do everything yourself.
Yes.
But at 2 million, that's untenable.
No, it becomes
or whatever the number is.
And it all depends how you're making that 200,000 as well, doesn't it?
Of course it does.
If you're selling widgets, whatever a widget is, and you're selling widgets, and you might be able to do most of it yourself, but if you're a time-based business, you certainly can't, which is one of the problems I've got. You reach this point, you certainly there aren't any more hours in the day to sell, and so you can't do everything yourself.
So then the question is, where do you get leverage in any business? And every business is different and every individual is different, but where do you get leverage?
Yeah.
And in part, the big question is, well, what is it you're trying to create? Are you trying to create a job, or are you trying to create a business? Because there'll be two different methodologies there.
Right. Okay. So that's kind of like a starting point in a sense with your process, is that right? Or is it?
Yeah, absolutely. The whole process starts with, and sometimes this can take a long time for people to realize actually what it is that they're trying to achieve. What is it that they want to build? Are they just after an income?
Yeah, a lifestyle job in effect.
Or is it more than that? So it all begins and ends with the client. What do they want? What are they trying to do? And sometimes helping them to understand what they want to do is quite a long task.
But yeah, because you can't see it yourself, can you?
Very often.
It's very difficult for me to say what I'm trying to do. Because half the time I'm thinking I want to grow the business into being ABC, and the other half of the time I'm thinking, yeah, but I've done that, and we grew a business, and it ended in a not particularly pleasant situation that cost a lot of money and stressed me to high heaven, and that's not where I want to go. But equally, if I look at 5 years from now, you ask yourself the question, where do you want to be? What are you trying to achieve? And it is very difficult. So I've got to ask you then, what are you doing? Because you've run the big businesses, you now are in coaching, and you've been doing this for a long time. What are you trying to achieve? Are you trying to gain income by helping people, or are you trying to grow a business into a larger thing by helping people?
Well, that's a really valid question. When I first started off, and which was 15, almost 16 years ago, my vision became I wanted to grow a coaching business.
Yes. Yeah.
And going back 12, 14 years ago, I had a number of associates.
Right.
So I was on that journey. And then I realized that I wasn't enjoying that much. And what I really enjoyed was working face to face with the client.
Yes.
So coaching.
Yeah, the actual job.
Yeah. And my ex-wife was a school teacher, and the more highly regarded she became, the further she moved away from the classroom.
Yes.
And
and
then I took the decision that I didn't want to do that. I wanted to be, because my experience is unique.
Yeah.
Partly because of that hiatus I reached.
Yes.
And that, you know, I can't hardly believe I'm saying this, but in those dark days, I never thought I would be grateful
No,
for those
no,
dark days.
no, no. Because you can't see it. I mean, my first job was with somebody who, again, I won't say his name, but he was the old traditional bullying, vicious manager of the old school, and he beat me mentally into a pulp. And
Yeah,
I, at the time, despised every day of going into work. But I looked back, you know, it wasn't long after that I realized that a lot of things that drive me and a lot of things that make me do what I do come back from that very dark and unpleasant time. And I'm not grateful for it because he was horrible.
yeah,
But I do know that I wouldn't be here if he hadn't beaten out some of those rough edges. Not physically, that would be a very strange working relationship, but verbally and mentally, he knocked off a lot of rough edges and a lot of my inherent arrogance, I think, at the time. But you can't see that at the time, and you shouldn't. It doesn't make that situation right, but it does put you in a position, doesn't it?
yeah. I mean, it sounds like my school days, to be honest,
Yeah, yeah,
where
yeah. Well,
we literally were beaten.
yeah, I got the strap every day, literally every day by a Catholic brother, one or the other. Every single day I got the strap, and I wasn't particularly naughty. I was, you know, the same as everyone else. We all used to get the strap. It was most days everyone got hit once, but that was you got to the point with that where I don't know what your situation was like, but you got to the point that where you didn't care. It meant nothing, you know, getting the strap meant nothing. And actually we misbehaved more to get the strap. But when I was working, this guy was nasty and vicious, and he would be unable to work in the modern environment. As a leader, he would be unable to work in the modern environment. But it did direct a lot of what I can look back now and see a lot of what I do now is because of that, I think.
Yeah,
I'd probably still push him down the stairs if I saw him.
but like you, I wouldn't say I was grateful for
No.
it. So, you know, a lot of my, and I was talking about this recently. I think a lot of my management ambition in the early days was because I wanted to prove that it could be done differently. I mean,
Right.
I'm old enough to very much grown up in a command and control environment.
Yes.
And, you know, the way people, particularly leaders and managers, treated people was barbaric.
It was shocking. Yeah.
Absolutely shocking. And I wanted to, and the language in my head was I wanted to break through that crust.
So did you do it differently? Because I mean, one of the things
yeah.
we were when we set up the previous agency, we were convinced there were a couple of things that we were not going to do because of the experiences we'd had, and we did do it differently. I'm not saying we did it right, but we did a few things differently. So you did manage differently then.
Oh, without a shadow of a doubt. And I think back to some of the teams and camaraderie that have happened when I was in the businesses that I was involved with, whether that was my business or not. And some of the results that we achieved were absolutely outstanding.
But this might be a wrong, I might be completely wrong, but if you look back, so when I look back at my first job, which was at Peugeot, the guy I'm referring to, he and everybody else, there was a level of command and control. You go do this, you go do this. If you don't do it right, you're going to get, you know.
Yeah. When I want your opinion, I'll tell you what it is.
And learn to keep your mouth shut, and I'm not interested, and blah, 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 shouting, abusive. But there was a whole layer of management that operated that way. And they went through their entire careers operating that way, and they went through their entire careers never having any, they never hit that hiatus. And yet, when you manage in a different way, do you think there's some connection between the...
No, I don't. I think the hiatus.
Sometimes.
I think the hiatus was really nothing to do with running the business. really, it was about me running myself.
But isn't that because you take on more of you care more and you get more engaged and you care about your staff and you take on more yourself, whereas the old way of managing was you go and do that, I'm going to do this, and I don't, and they didn't seem to care. Isn't it because you've swapped over and you're caring more?
That was a factor. I'll grant you. I mean, I say this, and it's not tongue in cheek. I wish I'd had a coach, because I didn't know what I didn't know.
No.
None of us know what we don't know. But what I didn't know was how to look after myself, how to do things any differently. And
don't you think sometimes we meet? I mean, I remember I worked at Volvo, and the guy I worked for, he was probably the closest I could get to a coach. You occasionally come up to somebody who teaches you and trains you and shows you how you should manage by managing you, and by example and by working with you, and that helps massively. But up until then, I wish. I mean, I wish I'd had somebody who could sit there and say, right, well, do this. Just take it like this and do this, and this is what you need to be doing. This is how you need to handle it. Otherwise, because at that point you were just flying blind.
Yeah. And even better if they'd said, just stop a minute. What is it you're trying to achieve? Let's just think this through.
Okay. So let me ask you a question. If you could, because I asked myself this, if you could go back to that young man in his 26 and is just working towards his ambitions, because you were ahead of the big dealership at 29, so 26, 27. If you could go back with all the knowledge and experience you've got, what would you tell yourself to do? How would you change yourself?
I think I would make sure that I had that type of a mentor figure somewhere in my life.
Right.
That you've just referred to.
Yeah.
And if I think about it, Martin, I when I was running big businesses within big businesses,
yes,
there was generally somebody like that.
Yes.
Not always, but often. Of course, the minute I was on my own,
yeah,
I didn't have that.
No, the minute you were at that point.
But I could have, and if I knew then what I knew now,
yeah,
I would have found somebody to be or some people to be for want of a better expression, a mentor or a coach.
Yes.
Because, as I said a minute ago, we don't know what we don't know.
No.
And it's what we don't know that costs us.
Yeah.
And of course, the higher up you get, the more autonomous you get, the fewer people there are to trade in the truth with you.
Yes, that's true.
And hold the mirror up. And actually, when you're at the top of an organization, even if it's only a small organization, you've got to go and find that, I believe, you've got to go and find that accountability.
Well, there's a big risk that you start to believe that you do know everything. Yeah. I know a lot of managers, and I think if you look at leadership these days in general, I think there's the people who are held up as running organizations and being in charge, and politically as well, they believe they know, whatever your political leanings are, they believe they know everything, because they don't have anybody who tells them, they don't have anything that tells them that they don't. If you look at Facebook, that's been held up for years as an organization, a fantastic organization that's run brilliantly, that's fast moving, move fast and break things, and yet they believe they know everything, and they believe they're above everything, and so things like Cambridge Analytica happen, and all these other things happen because they're not actually. They've got nobody to hold a mirror up to because they're massively successful and don't think they need to. Okay. So one thing I noticed when you started talking, you referred to yourself as a professional business coach.
Yes.
And you very particularly twice referred to yourself as a professional business coach. So where does that come from? Why do you think there are coaches? I mean, we're not going to talk about anyone in particular, but why professional as opposed to a business coach? What's the difference, do you think?
So when I first started all those years ago, I had to explain what a business coach was.
Right.
In the intervening years, and I've met lots. At one point, I coached coaches, so I've met lots of them. I've been part of at least 2 international coaching organizations.
Yes. Yes.
So I've met a lot of coaches, and when I say professional, by that I mean 2 things. I mean, I earn my living from being a business coach.
Yep.
And I operate to the highest standards I believe, with an exceptional degree of professionalism, okay. However you define that. And I use the word because, in 15 years, every time there have been layoffs at banks or building societies or accountants,
yep.
because this is an unregulated industry, people have called themselves coaches.
Yes,
yeah. Though I know a lot of coaches, I honestly know very, very few good ones. The reason that I stopped pursuing that idea of having a coaching firm,
yes,
was that the associates that worked with me were great people, but none of them could coach as well as I could.
Right.
And because excellence is really important to me, as they drifted away, I never ever replaced them.
It does seem, I would say, being seen, you're defining yourself by your professionalism, in a sense. That's part of what makes you what you are. That you are striving to, and if you define yourself by your professionalism, then you're always going to strive to be professional, and you're always going to strive to do a good job. So, don't you think then over the next 12 months, the marketplace is going to become increasingly disjointed and full of people who are coaches? I hate doing that.
Well, it is already. I mean, there's literally a coach on every street corner.
Yeah.
Or people that call themselves coaches.
Yes. However,
I still argue that, and I think it's a valid argument, I think in all the time I've been coaching, 15, now 16 years, I don't think I've met a coach that's ever owned a business of a significant size.
Yes. Yeah.
There will be people that say that they've run businesses, but they may have run a department within a large corporation.
Yeah.
Which is very different.
It is very different to running your own.
Unless it's your name on the check and your name on the bank account.
Yeah. Having done both, same as you, it's very different. I mean, I remember when I left, I handed my notice in at Volvo, and then 2 weeks before I left, I signed off a £20 million project. When you're running your own business, signing a £200 project makes you sweat sometimes. I'm not saying that signing off the 20 million didn't make me sweat, but it was a completely different situation, completely different way of working.
I think the emotional involvement, the pressure is way different. So
how do you differentiate yourself then? Because in the eye of the consumer, if I'm looking for a coach, and as you say, and I personally think the market's going to get more and more convoluted. I think in marketing, the market's going to get more and more messy over the next 2 years, as account directors, account managers, people who work in agencies, designers, anybody leaves their company because they have no choice, and they set themselves up. I mean, it's already, you've got people doing training in social media, for example. We see them a lot, and you actually get underneath what they've done. You say, well, I worked in a company and I did social media for a couple of years and I was really good at it, and great, but that doesn't necessarily give you the background, does it? So how do you differentiate yourself? What do you do?
Well, that's the challenge. But the answer, one of the answers to that question is that, you know, the minute I get in front of somebody, they'll notice the difference.
Yes. Yes.
You know, there are very, very few people, and it's not just about experience. It's about empathy. It's about knowledge, and it's also about courage. I mean, you know, part of the role of a coach is to challenge the coachee.
Yes, which is quite difficult.
And sometimes I smile and I'll say to people, you know, you're actually paying me to beat you up.
Yes.
Because a coach is someone that won't let the coachee get away with things.
So have you ever had a situation where you couldn't do that, where they were unwilling to listen?
Well, that's part of the skill.
Right.
You've got to have enough rapport and respect. The relationship has got to be resonant enough,
Yeah.
so that when you do call them out, they listen.
Okay.
And if you're not able to do that, it's not the client's fault, it's the coach's fault. You haven't built enough of a relationship.
Well, there must be some times when you get to the point where, because I've had clients where, certainly over the last 12 months, where a couple of them where the warning bells were ringing in my ears from day one. I mean, do you select your clients? Would you walk away from somebody if you don't think it's right?
Oh, without a doubt, without a doubt. And to be honest, you've always got to be prepared to put that customer on the line.
Right.
You know, because if I care more about the income than I do about doing the right thing for that client,
Yes.
I won't call
Well,
out.
that's when you compromise. That's when you
compromise.
And there's a massive risk in that. So, I mean, I don't, without going into business details, but you know, the last 12 months for every business have been hard, to say the least. And you know, there is. This is what I did. You know, the warning bells were ringing. I thought these people are not going to be. This is just going to be more trouble than it's worth. And I still took the client on, and I still tried to do a good job. But in the end, it didn't. You know, in I've been doing this for 8 years. I've only ever had it end badly twice, and it's 3 times. And but 2 of those have been in the last 12 months. And it's because you're not doing what you say you do, which is being a bit more selective, making sure you fit.
So one of the things that's different, and I think it is important, when I work with somebody, there's no contract.
Yes.
You know, so the deal is, what I'll say to a client is, look, when I work with you, there's no contract. I promise to give you more value than you're paying for.
Yes.
If I'm not, you have to sack me.
Okay.
It's as simple as that. However, that's my photocopier just going.
Okay, I thought it was.
However, the sting in the tail is, if you're not doing the work, if you're not putting the effort in, I'm going to sack you.
Okay, but then there's a lot of coaches that say that. There's a lot of coaches that we know of that'll say that, and the first thing they effectively do is they work out in their heads, right, it's costing you £5,000 to employ me for X amount of time. Right, so let's look at your costs and your pricing and your staff. Get rid of that person, do that. It's like the old thing with a consultant. The consultant comes in, the first thing they do is they clear out. I know there's a difference between consultants and coaches, but a consultant comes in, and to make it worth it, they clear out a layer of staff. They clear out people, and then they can say, oh, well, we've added to your bottom line. But that's not your process, is it?
That's not my process. And you know, it's not necessarily about the client's bottom line.
Right.
If he says it's about his bottom line, then we'll focus on his bottom line. But very often, it's more complex than that.
Yes.
People want to feel fulfilled. They want to feel satisfied. They want to feel as though they're doing something worthwhile. At the end of the day, the only person that can judge whether this is paying is the client. So when you consider that every client every month gets the opportunity to decide whether they're going to stick with me or leave, I'm hugely proud of what I call my client retention.
Yes.
And most clients are with me on average over 15 years now, between 3 and 4 years.
Okay. Yeah.
I've had some clients with me. In fact, one client was with me for 7, almost 8 years.
Yeah.
And no word of a lie, they'd just been on the phone this morning. They want me to do some more work with them.
Okay.
So I'm hugely proud of that.
Yeah, you should be.
So,
because that's the only real measure you can have of your success, because you're not making more money if they're successful, if that's what I mean.
that's right. And that would be a business model that's an alternative. You know,
Yeah.
we go for a profit share rather
Yeah.
than charge a flat fee. But the reason I don't do that is if I had 2 clients, one of whose business was flying for
Yeah, you
whatever
focus.
reason. Where am I
But
going?
doesn't it also, if you're going on a profit share, doesn't it also compromise your advice sometimes?
Absolutely.
Because that to me always seems to me to be, because I've had clients say, well, will you do stuff based on, we'll give you X amount. And it's like, well, yeah, but then, for example, some of what we do pay-per-click, people sometimes do it on a percentage of spend. We don't ever do that, because if I'm paid on a percentage of your spend, then my only objective really, one of my objectives has got to be to get you to spend more, hasn't it? And that it compromises the advice that you're giving if you do that. So you very deliberately don't, which sets you apart from other people. And you don't have a process where basically your first thing to do is go in and manipulate their costs.
No, we decide what the customer wants, and this has to be an investment. Otherwise customers will draw it to a close in double quick time.
Yes.
But clearly it's working, and I've got countless testimonials and stories and proof of how businesses have grown.
Has it ever not worked? Have you ever had a client where you've done it for a bit and you've thought, this ain't working?
Yeah, and then I fired them.
And how did they take that?
Well, they know going in.
Yeah, but that's not easy.
There is I'll not. This is an absolutely true story. I'll not use the guy's name, but I met somebody, because I tend to operate fairly close to home.
Yeah.
Most of my clients before COVID visited me, so now it's all on Zoom, of course. But this particular guy, if ever I met anyone that needed a coach, it was this particular guy. And his method of operation was he'd inherited a store, and he would grow the store, but he wasn't very good at making profit.
Yeah.
So his methodology was to start up another store to cash flow the first one.
Yeah.
And, you know, it was obviously heading for trouble. And I could see that. And we saw quite a lot of each other over the years, and he decided not to come on board on more than a couple of occasions. And then one day I was going out for a sandwich at lunchtime, and I bumped into him. And he said, "Ian, I need to see you." And he got his sandwich. He came into my office. He said, I need to start with you. I need to be coached. So I went through all the stuff, and you know, if you're not doing the work, I'm going to sack you. And literally, he wrote the check out. And before the end of the first month, I sat down for a coaching session with him, and he hadn't done anything.
No.
And I just sat down with him and said, look, this isn't going to work in 3, now 4 weeks, because whether this works or not isn't really down to me. It's down to how much work and effort the client puts in. And I said, you've done none of this stuff. And I'd written out a check for the amount that he paid me.
Right.
Look, here's your money back, because if in the first month it's not working, clearly it was the wrong decision.
Yeah.
And we'll just draw stumps. And he burst into tears.
Well, sorry, I shouldn't laugh.
So the story goes on. I didn't see him for a while, and probably 6 or 9 months later, I bumped into him again in the same sandwich shop. There was a sandwich shop just opposite the office. Can I come and see you? Yeah, come on, sit down and have a chat. So he came in. He said, look, he was quite embarrassed. He said, will you coach my general manager?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I said, well, of course I will, but you know the conditions. He's got to want to, and got to do the work, etc., etc. But let me ask, why would you want me to do that? And he looked a bit sheepish and said, have you not heard? Heard what? Long story cut short, well, I'm going to jail next week. And what he'd done is he'd rented a property with some outbuildings, turned the outbuildings into a cannabis farm. And he was just about to make his first shipment when he got raided.
There's a lot of money in that.
So much so he said, and he said this in all seriousness, and to be honest, I believe him. He said, look, I'm not a criminal. He said, but I was desperate.
Yeah.
And if I grew this batch of cannabis, he said it was £100,000, and I'd have had that money within 3 weeks of being.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking to myself, I wish he knew the numbers in his business that well.
Yes.
He wouldn't have been in this position. But he said, look, I was just desperate, and this is the only way I could see out. So do I sack clients? Yes, I do. Does it ever have consequences?
Yes, it does.
Yes, it does.
Okay. What I want to do, I want to end with one simple question. Bearing in mind how the year has been, the year has for every business. If you look back the last 12 months, I think we will look back at this year as being the weirdest year of our life. If you could go back 1 year from today, before we'd only just started to hear the words COVID-19, we've only just started to hear what was going on, and we could never have predicted that 12 months later we would basically not be allowed to go out. What would you tell yourself? What piece of advice would you tell yourself 12 months ago?
Not to worry about it and flex.
Not to worry about it and flex.
Because what was it Darwin said? It's not the strongest of the species that survives, but the one most able to change.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
And all of us, individually and collectively, as people and as businesses that are surviving, we flex. The more we flex, the more we've adapted to change, the more we've prospered. And if I think back to what I thought about going into this, well, what's going to happen? But actually, the one thing that it's all proved to me is that as human beings and actually as businesses, we've got a level of resilience.
Yes.
Which is phenomenal when you think about it.
Yes.
And so the major question is, am I prepared to let go of the way I've always, and not just for me, for everybody, the way I've always done it?
Yes.
And such a lot of people have. I mean, my business is totally different to what it was 12 months ago.
Well, you're not seeing anybody face to face. You're not doing anything like that.
And I'm still as busy as ever.
But are you enjoying it as much? It's the face to face you like. I mean, I find Zoom drives me a little bit mad.
Well, likewise, and I think I said to somebody last week, and it's in my brain now. Some nights when I leave here and I go downstairs, I've been face to face with people on Zoom for maybe 6 or 8 hours in the day, and I go out to the car and I think, God, I haven't seen anybody today. And it's a bit like the weekend that we've just had. It was okay, but it lacked some of the spice that
it does lack some of it. I mean, we've been working together for a while now. We've only met once.
Yeah.
And I'm glad we have met, because I find on this You don't pick up the subtle clues. You've no body language. Particularly if you're trying to do coaching, it must be a lot harder.
I don't find that bit harder,
Right.
but I think that's really about building rapport and emotional connection.
Yes.
Which are skills that can be learned.
Yeah.
But what I find is that, when I'm walking out to the car, I haven't had any curbside chats. I haven't met anybody at
No.
and that's the spice. Like not going out for a meal at the weekend.
Yeah, it's the bit that, I was listening to a podcast, I think Joel podcast the other day, and he was saying that talking to something about leadership, and one of the things that saying is missing is you don't go and have a coffee and somebody else's boss is grabbing a coffee at the same time. You get that 2 minutes of chat. You don't. I mean, when I worked at Volvo, you'd be sitting down, you'd have your lunch, and you'd be sitting with your friends, and then the receptionist would sit with you, and then quite often the MD would come and sit down with you.
Yeah.
And you'd sit and you'd have your lunch, and you'd pick up just those few little things, and you get a bit imbued into the culture, and it adds or somebody walking past just says something and it breaks it up, and you don't get that because the minute you turn Zoom off, it's like the light switched off, isn't it? It's weird. Yeah. It's a weird feeling. Okay.
And we tend to use Zoom very much as a business tool. And what I'm trying to encourage people to do now is literally have a coffee Zoom.
Yeah, have a chat. Yeah.
And don't talk about business in the same way as you might do if you're having a sandwich.
Yes, and I think that's what's going to have a big impact on leadership and business culture. One of my friends works in a company, and they basically closed all the offices down. They used to have 300-400 people, and they're all working from home. And they see that they're going to be working from home for the next 5 years. And I think 12 months from now, there'll be big consequences of that, unless people start using it, doing what you're saying,
flexing and adapting.
Yeah, because all you do is you ring up, you have your meeting, you have your Zoom meeting. You don't get any of the. You don't get any of the things that actually I liked about working in a company.
Yeah, it becomes very functional.
It does. But, okay, right. Well, I'm aware we've been talking for an hour, and we've gone down a few routes that I didn't think about when we first started. So I'll just say thank you very much, and we'll put this on both our mutual websites, and we'll see where we go. So thank you very much, Ian.
Excellent. Good talking to you.
Good talking. So that was all right.
Yeah. So are you going to edit that now and see if?
Yeah, I'm not going to. Well, my intention is not to edit anything out from the conversation, because unless you're unhappy with anything.
No, I don't. No, I wouldn't have said it if I was.
No, I'll edit the beginning and I'll edit the end.
Yeah. But let's just see what it.
Let's see what it is. I've got a proper audio recording that I've done here, and we've got the video here, so we'll see what the video quality is like. I'll download it, edit it, send it to you. You can say, great, and then we can put it on your YouTube. If you're happy, I'm going to put it on mine anyway. But yeah. I think it's what we're trying to get is your personality, isn't it?
Well, let's have a look at it and see what we think.
Okay, so we'll get on with the website stuff this afternoon then.
Right, I'll crack on.
All right, mate. You take care. Have a good day.
Good talking to you. Bye now.
See you. Bye.